Welcome, everybody. This is the DVMUG Zoom meeting for June 28th, and we have a special presenter today, Jason Snell. And Jason's ready to go, so take it away.
Hey, everybody. I'm you're looking at a picture of me from a while ago when I worked at Macworld. I was the lead editor at Macworld for more than a decade. I've been independent for almost 8 years. I do sixcolors.com. I do a bunch of tech podcasts and other podcasts, and write a column still at Macworld every week. Just wrote it, in fact, or just wrote tomorrow's column in my backyard, where it's I guess, given that this is the people I'm speaking to are in the far East Bay, the cool temperature of 84 degrees here right now, but it's warm for Mill Valley. My presentation today is about WWDC 2022. What's new at the Apple Developer Conference? Okay, I hope everybody see me. I'm still seeing John as the speaker. Do I
see you.
No, I see you. We're recording you.
All right, great. That's fine. It's just John is highlighted, so I wanted to make sure that people are not seeing me. Okay, great. Zoom, how does it work? Okay. WWDC 2022. This is the beginning of Apple's year. It is when Apple starts the clock on what the next year of Apple product releases are going to be, especially regarding the operating systems that run our devices. So a lot of news about what's going to be coming out in the fall, and then what things are not going to be coming out quite in the fall, but maybe a little bit later, and what operating systems are going to have the bugs that we're going to be complaining about and that they're going to be fixing through next spring. In fact, there was just a new beta today of the latest versions of the existing operating systems. So you got to love it. They're still fixing things on last year's model while they're building this year's model. So I'll talk about what's new in the operating systems that Apple does that will be coming out this fall, usually September or October. Generally, it's kind of late September for iOS and iPadOS, and it's sometime in October, oftentimes for macOS. Before I get to that, sometimes Apple does product announcements at WWDC because they've got a crowd there. I have to say, the last few years it's been a virtual media event. Basically, it's been a pre-recorded video. This year was also a pre-recorded video. However, they invited maybe around 1,000 developers to come to the Apple Park campus, and they invited the media, the usual media group. So I have been on the Apple Park campus before because I've been to several events at the Steve Jobs Theater. However, when you enter on Tantau Boulevard at the sort of entrance area that's by the visitor center, to get to the Steve Jobs Theater, you go left and up the hill. It's away from the rest of the campus. On the Monday of WWDC, we went right and we walked up to the giant Ring building, which, let me tell you, is way more impressive in person than any picture you've seen of it. It's enormous, and it's a wild space and place. And we got to sit there and get a personal intro from Craig Federighi was there, and Tim Cook was there. We got a big good morning from Tim Cook. And then after the presentation was over, the developers got all sorts of tours and stuff, and the media went to the Steve Jobs Theater, and we got some briefings about new products. So it was quite an event. And one of the things that we got to do that we haven't done since the pandemic started was get our hands on new hardware, which was very exciting. So Apple announced 2 new laptops, the M2 MacBook Air, which is not yet for sale, but they say is going to come out next month, and the M2 13-inch MacBook Pro, which is now out and for sale, and I have one right in front of me. So let's start there. Let's start with the hardware. The M2, I think, is actually really interesting. It's the first time Apple has done a revision of its own Apple Silicon for the Mac. And so we're going to see, well, what are they going to do with the Mac? And is it going to be like the iPhone, where they have a 14 and then they do a 15, and presumably this fall they'll do a 16? And the answer is it's actually quite similar. The M1 was based on the A14 that was in last year's or 2 years ago's iPhone, I guess at this point. and the M2 is based on the A15 that was in last fall's iPhone. So the M2 is faster than the M1 in the same way that often last year's iPhone is slower than this year's iPhone. It's the same kind of thing. Every year, Apple gets that chip to be a little bit faster. Of course, the truth is very few people are going to be going to an M2 Mac from an M1 Mac. They're going to be going there from Intel because most people don't buy a brand new computer to replace their old computer every single year. And if you do, congratulations, that's great because you always have a new computer. It's great. Most people don't do that though. So the Intel advantage, that we saw last year where M1 just was so much faster than Intel, still the case if you're going from Intel to M2, except even a little bit faster. The M2 is also faster in a bunch of different ways. So often when we're reviewing hardware, people like me, we talk about core counts, and the core counts are the same, or the speed of the processor core. And it's a little bit faster, but it's not just that. There's lots of things that go into making a computer faster. The M2 is faster than the M1. And when I say M1, I want to be clear, I'm saying the base model M1, not the M1 Pro or Max or Ultra, but just the M1 itself, the first M1 versus the M2, because they're both kind of base models of a whole family. The M2 is faster than the M1 in more than just its cores and more than just its graphics cores. It's faster in its memory. It's actually using the higher speed memory that was in the M1 Pro and Max and Ultra instead of the slower speed memory that was in the M1. So memory is faster. That memory is denser, which means they can actually increase the maximum amount of memory they can fit on an M2. So the M2 maxes out at 24 gigs of RAM, up from 16. And there are a lot of people who really wanted an M1, but the thing that they gave them pause was 16 gigs of RAM. Was that enough? The M2 will go up to 24. The storage is faster. So the SSD, and that makes everything faster. Storage is often the thing that you wait for. If anybody remembers the days of spinning hard drives, especially, they were often the slowest thing on your system. Even as fast as SSDs are, they can be the thing that makes the difference between slow or fast, is how fast is that drive. And so you put all of that together and you get a chip in the M2 that's faster. And I think if we look at how fast the M1 Macs were, they were all about the same speed. It's kind of funny. An M1 Mac was an M1 Mac, and there really wasn't that much of a difference. I expect the same will be true of the M2, that if there is an M2 Mac Mini or an M2 iMac at some point, they're gonna feel very much like these two laptops do, which is 10% faster maybe than an M1 of the same variety, and way faster, of course, than Intel if you're coming from Intel. The MacBook Air M2, which is again coming out next month, and I don't have one. I did get my hands on it for a little while on the Monday at the Steve Jobs Theater, where they had their hands-on area, and then I had a little briefing afterward, and I got to pick it up and hold it and look at it and light and shine it. Try to see what those colors are, the weird colors: silver, space gray, starlight, and midnight. I don't know what that is. You know what silver and space gray are. Starlight is silver with a yellow undertone instead of a blue undertone, so it looks a little champagne gold. Midnight looks black, except if you hold it up in the light and you get a nice reflected shine right off of it, you can tell that it's actually very dark blue, but very dark blue to the point where it's almost black. I wish they had made more bright colors for the MacBook Air. That would have been nice. They didn't. So 4 colors to choose from. I'm excited about the midnight one because I used to have a black MacBook back in the day, and I like the idea of having that dark color one. So we'll see about that. Beyond the color, though, it's an exciting laptop because it's a redesign of the MacBook Air. If you remember the history, MacBook Air is the most popular Mac Apple has made for the last 12 years, probably, year in and year out. And I've had a bunch of them, and I love them. And a lot of you have used them too. What's interesting about this MacBook Air is it is a case redesign for the first time, I would say, in a long time. Because remember, the MacBook Air, when they brought back the Retina version of the MacBook Air, its selling point was that it looked almost identical to the previous MacBook Air. And the M1 MacBook Air looked just like it too. So they really haven't changed the MacBook Air in like 10 or 12 years. It's sort of been what it's been. The New MacBook Air looks different. It doesn't have the wedge shape anymore. It's got the flat sides. It feels much more akin to the 14 and 16-inch MacBook Pros that they announced last year. I think it looks great. It's thin. It isn't wedge shaped, and it's thicker than the narrow end of the wedge, but it's thinner than the thick end of that wedge. So in the end, its volume is a lot less than the old MacBook Air is. It's light. And then it's got MagSafe back on it, like those 14 and 16-inch MacBook Pros did, which is not just about the fact that it's great to have MagSafe in case somebody trips on a power cord and it just flies out instead of pulling your computer off your desk. It's also great that it's got MagSafe because it only has 2 ports on it. And if you've got a computer with 2 ports and no MagSafe and you're charging, it means you have 1 port. And with the new MacBook Air, you have 2 ports and MagSafe. It's a lot better. I think it's so great that it's back. And for those who care, the cord, the MagSafe cord that comes with it is color matched to the laptop. Just, little extra touch. So if you get a midnight, you'll get a midnight cord, and silver, you'll get a silver cord, and it's a whole thing. Whereas I tested the space gray MacBook Pro 14-inch, and it came with a silver cord, and I'm like, really, Apple? You couldn't color match? I was surprised. They have yellow lightning cables for the yellow iMac, but not for that MacBook Pro. I guess pros don't care. I don't know. I think they would care more. They didn't ask me. What else is in the MacBook Air? Other than MagSafe, it's got the notch, like the 14-inch and 16-inch MacBook Pros, and you might say to yourself, "Oh, is that a positive thing?" I would say it is, because what they're doing with the notch is they're taking your screen like you have on that 13-inch MacBook Pro, and you're just making the top of it. I mean, the bezels all kind of went out a little bit, and then the top of it slides up and takes up that space around the webcam. And Apple has built, if you haven't used one of those MacBook Pros, the 14 or 16-inch, it's really clever, because basically what they do is they wrap the menu bar around it. So your whole interface area that you're using all the time is not cut in, it's not bisected by this notch sticking down. What you have is your menu bar. And so, yes, the menu bar kind of skips over, but depending on the app you're using, I think the ideal is the app's menu items are on the left side and your menu bar items are on the right side, but they will leap across if they need to. Anyway, it's a way of a clever way, I think, of getting more screen space on that surface, given that they still have to have a cutout for their webcams. By the way, the webcam is 1080p, so it's the best webcam ever in a MacBook Air. This is all good. This is all good stuff. I'm looking forward to that product. I think it's going to be really great. It still doesn't have a fan. And probably if the M2 is anything like the M1, probably won't really need one, because it's very hard to get a MacBook Air to heat up so much that it has to slow itself down. It's very hard to do. The other computer that they announced is, I have it here, this guy. It's a 13-inch M2 MacBook Pro. And just as excited as I am about the MacBook Air, I am not excited about the 13-inch MacBook Pro. What can I tell you about it? If you've seen any laptop from Apple since 2016, you've seen this one. It's using the old style. It doesn't have MagSafe. It's got 2 USB ports. It's got the old webcam. It's a 720p webcam. It's got a touch bar, which, if you think the touch bar's time has come and gone, it's disappointing. If you love the touch bar, run out and get one, because this is probably the last computer that will ever be sold with a touch bar. It is okay. I've told this story a few times, but I'll tell it to you all. Why does this product exist? Apple says it's their second best-selling laptop after the MacBook Air. Why is that? And why have they not updated it to be as state-of-the-art as the 14 and the 16-inch models they did last year? The answers are all about money and positioning. Some people, and by people I mostly mean institutions, businesses with IT people who are purchasing computers, don't want to buy something that's not a MacBook Pro. They like the name. They think it means something. Trick is that the 13-inch MacBook Pro isn't at all like the 14 and the 16, but I think there's a perception that a MacBook Pro is a MacBook Pro, and that if you buy a MacBook Pro instead of a MacBook Air, you're getting something better. I would argue that for most uses, that is not true with the M2. It's just not true. But the fact is, Apple needs a computer that's $1299 at the bottom of the MacBook Pro price range, a fancy new ProMotion micro LED notch MagSafe, if they do that thing, what would that cost? And the answer is about $2,000. It's the 14-inch MacBook Pro. So Apple has kept this old design around so that it can hit the price point at $1,299. By the way, an interesting point about this, if you spec the MacBook Air and the MacBook Pro 13-inch with the same specs, they cost the same. And in almost every case, they'll also probably be about exactly the same in terms of speed. So no, I can't really recommend that anybody buy the MacBook Pro. The edge cases are things like it has a little more battery. It has the touch bar. Do you not like MagSafe? Do you not care that MagSafe, that if you don't have MagSafe, it eats another port? I don't know. Those are all things for you to decide, but I don't think I would recommend it. Oh, and it has a fan. And I should say that it has a fan. So theoretically, if you run the M2 hot enough that it needs to be cooled, the fan will blow on it, it'll cool off, and it'll be able to run for longer. But the truth is, with these Apple Silicon Macs, they're so power efficient and they're so powerful that it's almost impossible to get the fan to run on these things at all. And you really need to have an intense graphics test that is running for a long time, probably in a warm environment, in order to get it to kick on that fan at all. So I think that's an edge case too. So I am not very excited about the MacBook Pro 13-inch. I think the MacBook Air is a much more interesting product that is better for more people. But the MacBook Pro exists too, and now it's got an M2 in it. Before I get to the OSs, I thought I would pause there and see if anybody has any questions about hardware. That might be a good way to break this up. So I don't know how we want to do questions, but I would take some questions now if you have them.
I'm wondering
hardware.
I'm wondering about this, the displays on the two of them in comparison, and also the weight.
More pixels on the MacBook Air. The MacBook Air is lighter. I don't have the weight right in front of me. More pixels. I don't think it's a better screen. I think it's all just it's a P3 IPS screen. So basically it's they're very similar screens, but they're more pixels because it's a bigger screen. It's 13.6 instead of 13.3 diagonal, and it's got the extra height because the Air does, because it has the notch. So it's got a lot of that going for it. Technically it's a liquid retina display, but I think that in reality they support the same color gamut and they're the same brightness. They're both a lot dimmer than those 14 and 16-inch MacBook Pros. And then I can give you the weight. It's 3 pounds for the MacBook Pro and 2.7 pounds for the MacBook Air, which is actually a little bit lighter than the M1 MacBook Air. Any other hardware M2 MacBook Air questions? Okay. You can ask me questions at the end too. That's fine. Let me talk about the OSs. Funny thing about what Apple is doing these days, which is look, Apple is one company and it makes all of its own hardware and all of its own software. And it's got multiple operating systems. It's got, depending on how you count, 4 or 5 or more operating systems out there. The only way it can afford to do this is by recycling. Apple's a big recycler. I know Apple puts those things in about they're using recycled aluminum and they got solar energy and they're a very green company. But the best recycling Apple does is in its own technology, because it can't build little bespoke features for just the Mac or just the iPhone. It really needs to try and spread as much of it out as possible. And so much of the story technically of the last few years of all of Apple's operating systems has been about getting everything in alignment. And I think when I last spoke here, I talked about this, but just to mention it again, about 2 years ago, maybe 3 years ago, Apple made a point of saying that even though iOS was based on the Mac, if you remember back to when the iPhone came out, that was like a big selling point, was it runs Mac OS 10. And it's true, it ran a stripped down version of Mac OS 10 at the beginning. But what happened is, from 2007 on, the two platforms diverged. Even though they were based on the same thing, they started to go in some different directions as they iterated. And over the last 3, 4, or 5 years, Apple has made a concerted effort to get the Mac and iOS, and including iPad, on a base level using the same technologies again, because that makes it easier for them to recycle. So they took probably a lot of time to do things that were almost invisible to us in terms of taking the whole like subsystem at the lowest layer of the operating systems and making sure that this thing over here and this thing over there were the same, instead of being like this thing, they diverged from the same parent back in 2007. That's not so good. So they've done that. As a result, now they roll out features and they tend to roll them out everywhere. This is actually a thing that, if you remember people talking about things like Catalyst, which let you take iPad apps and run them on the Mac, something like Swift UI, which is a way for people to develop interfaces for software, and they can develop it and have it run on an Apple Watch and an iPhone and an iPad and a Mac. What they're trying to do is build technologies that allow app developers, but also Apple, to not have to build 3 different apps in order to have an iPhone app, an iPad app, and a Mac app. They want to build one app that works differently on the different platforms, but is from the same source. That's the goal. So you saw it this year, I think more than we've ever seen it before. They insist, at least for now, on making these announcements where they say, oh, let me tell you what will happen on the iPhone. Let me tell you what's new on the iPad. Let me tell you what's new on the Mac. And I think they're going to have to give it up pretty soon, because the truth is 90% of what they announced is everywhere. And it actually is a little confusing, because they were announcing things for the iPad, and then at the end they said, oh yeah, and this is also on the Mac. Like, okay, but why wasn't it in the Mac part then? And the answer is, we saved it for the iPad part. And that's not a really great reason, but that's Apple. That's what they're doing. So let me talk about what's new across Apple's platforms coming this fall, or possibly later than this fall. I'll get to that when we get there. Focus mode, which they announced last year, which is okay. I know some people who use it. I know some people who tried it and just haven't bothered. They're going to make it more powerful in a bunch of ways. Focus mode will be easier to use. You can say like, don't notify me from these apps, and yes from these apps. You're going to be able to sort of like do yes and no. And they're adding this thing called filters that will allow apps to change what they show you based on what mode you're in. And their example of that was, if you want to have a no work mode, a home mode, you can have like mail not show you your work email if you want to, which is kind of fun. And you can see how other apps might be able to do that too, where you end up having sort of like a work only, home only, and maybe a shared kind of focus mode. You'll be able to do that using Focus. There are a lot of improvements to the Mail app. I know a lot of Mac users especially rely on Apple's built-in Mail app, a very popular app. Hasn't really gotten a lot of updating recently. They are finally bringing a whole bunch of improvements to Mail. They added a queue for later feature, so you can send this message later, send this message tonight or tomorrow. Finally, there's a like a reminder thing saying, you haven't replied to this. There's some sort of like little smart, I've been looking at your mailbox and wondering why you haven't done anything with this message kind of stuff. There's an unsend feature, which is kind of funny, because how does unsend work with email, which is the standard that doesn't have the ability to unsend? The answer is it doesn't send it. You send it at, like, say send, and it just doesn't send it for 30 seconds and gives you a chance to say, oh, no, don't. But the net result is just that it just waits 30 seconds to make sure you're sure before it sends it. It's pretty funny. But if you're like me, there's nothing like saving something or queuing it, or in my case, for my writing, posting it to the internet. The moment that happens is the moment you realize, nope, there's a mistake. I did something wrong. I shouldn't do that. So 30 seconds of grace you get to say, I don't actually want to send that message after all. And there's improved search. Search and Mail was really came in with Spotlight on the Mac and hasn't improved much. They seem to have put a modern search engine on top of it, including things like really fuzzy searches, synonyms, misspelled words that it knows what word you actually meant, or will suggest a word that you probably meant, like sort of like how Google does it, just on your device. So that should be a lot better. There's a feature in Safari. Last year was a ride. They did a bunch of stuff to Safari. Safari is a lot quieter this year, and it's all for the best. But there is a great feature that they actually previewed last year and said, this is coming, get ready. And it's happening now. There's this alliance, and it's actually Microsoft, Apple, and Google, and they're all part of this alliance, and they've all agreed to implement this new feature that Apple is calling passkeys. It's in Safari. If you've ever gone to apple.com and gotten that and to log into like the Apple online store, and instead of having your username and password, it brings up a little box that says, use Touch ID, or put in, or put in your on the Mac. Sometimes it's just put in your password for your Mac, and then you're logged in. That is basically what passkeys implements for any website in the world. And the idea here is they're using, it's very complicated, but the short version is they're using cryptography to eliminate passwords. And it's not like they're encrypting your password, like something like the password manager or 1Password. They're actually not using a password. Instead, you're using public key cryptography, which is this complicated thing. But the idea is you can prove you're you, and the other server knows that you're you, and it lets you in. And that's it. There's no password, which means there's no password for you to forget. And there's no password that could be leaked. If they have a data breach on their end, and probably lots of us have had that moment where somebody says, we gave away your password. We're sorry about that. Please change your password everywhere. With passkeys, that can't happen. It literally can't happen, because all they have is the public key, which doesn't give you anything. Only the private key that the user has is able to log in to that site. It's pretty great. And it's going to be everywhere. It'll take a little while, but given that Microsoft and Google and Apple are all behind it, it will be in every browser, and websites will implement it, and it'll be better for everybody. If you're asking yourself, well, what if I'm on a device that doesn't support passkey? What will I do then? It's pretty amazing. They've got a whole video about it on the WWDC website, but basically you can take your phone and like scan a QR code on the device that it doesn't belong to you, and it will log you in. It's wild stuff. So they've thought of a lot of this stuff. So maybe passwords will be history, probably in a few years. It'll take a little while, but passkeys is an exciting technology that's going to make people's lives easier, I think. Another Safari feature they added is shared tab groups. Last year, they introduced tab groups. This idea that you can have different sets of tabs. So if you're somebody who likes to keep 100 tabs open at once, you could put 10 groups of 10 if you wanted to, or whatever, and organize them that way. In the next version of all of Apple's OSs, you'll be able to share tab groups with other people. So the best example they had is like if you've got a partner and you're planning your vacation together, or you've got a business partner and you're planning a project together, you can have a shared set of tabs that you collaborate on, and you can see what the other person has put into those tab groups and change them and move them. And I think that's going to be a fun feature that people are going to use. I'm doing research for a vacation is such a great example, because I think people actually do that, and they end up having to like send links back and forth to their partners instead of just, you'll have a shared tab group that you can look at about the vacation. Let's see, there's so many in here. Live text, quick actions. Live text, which they added last year, is being expanded. The ability for the system to basically read text in images. There's a bunch of new stuff there in terms of being able to pull that stuff out and act on it. It's basically using this thing called data detectors that Apple has had for ages now, where, if you have a phone number somewhere and it's kind of like gets a line under it and a thing next to it, and it offers to call it or save it. It's looking at data on your system and saying, I think that's a phone number. Well, it'll do that in photos now, which is interesting. Also, they've expanded the data detectors to do some very clever things, like offer to translate or convert on the fly. So if somebody sends you a local time, and said, why don't we talk at 10 o'clock, but they're on the East Coast, if you click on it, it will say 7 a.m. Pacific or 7 p.m. Pacific, depending. If they say, I spent 20 pounds on that, and you click on it, it'll say how many dollars that is. It does some it's trying to intelligently translate and convert things in the background, which could be a lot of fun also a feature that people will misuse horribly, but is fun, is this sort of pick up and lift feature from within images in Photos app and elsewhere. If you've ever used Photoshop and done the select subject feature, it's basically that, where it figures out what the subject of your photo is and makes it a selectable and draggable portion of the image. So the example that they used, if you've got a picture of a dog, you can actually tap and hold on the dog and start to drag it, and the dog comes out, but the background doesn't. Like I said, there'll be a lot of really bad pictures that way, but it is kind of fun. It's a fun feature. And it shows this is all based on Apple's machine learning stuff. Using the neural engine in their chips, they're able to do a lot of stuff that used to be way too expensive to build into an operating system, and now it's not. There's a new Home app. The Home app, I think, was really bad, is really bad, and they are doing a new one. There is, as somebody who has written a book about photos, a bunch of features in Photos, but the big one is family photo sharing. So you can share a library with someone else. It's really made for families, but it can be used by other people too. And there are a bunch of different ways to contribute photos. You can say, contribute all my photos starting at this time. You can manually add photos or have them automatically added. You can set it up to do things like, if you're with other people with whom you've shared a photo library, all the photos that everybody takes when you're together get automatically put in the library, where it's actually aware that you're all in proximity. There's a whole bunch of different things they're trying to do here, but the big one is just, and I know that there are probably many of you out there who've been in this situation. My wife and I take pictures on our iPhones all year long. And at the end of the year, we do an annual calendar of our photos from the year. And at the end of the year, I have to plug in her camera and import all of her photos into my photo library, because that's the only way that we can keep our photo libraries together. And that won't be the case anymore. We will be able to keep our photo libraries together. The way it works in practice is that every Apple ID has its own photo library, and then there is the shared library, and they show up together in the Photos app, unless you want to see them separately, but they will by default show up together, and the ones that are shared will be marked with a little icon. And like I said, you can choose what goes in there and what doesn't, but it looks like they've really given it a lot of thought. I asked them about this feature like 5 years ago, and they said, it's very complicated. And I said, I understand that, but you really ought to do it. And 5 years later, they did it. I guess they were thinking about it for 5 years. I'm not sure if it's that complicated, but they did finally do it. And I'm very excited that they're doing it. And just a few other features that are everywhere. SharePlay, which was a feature they announced last year, which let you do a FaceTime call, essentially, while watching a video, a movie or a TV show or something like that, or listening to music. They clearly got a lot of feedback from people who said, I'd like to do this, but texting instead. I don't need to have a FaceTime call with somebody who's watching a movie. We'll be in sync and we'll text each other. So they're adding that. You will be able to delete and edit messages in the Messages app. There's a 15-minute window after which they're kind of locked in. So far as I can tell, if you're on an older version of iOS or macOS, you just don't see the edits or the deletions, which is, I don't know if that's good, but everybody will get on board eventually, right? And there's FaceTime handoff, which I actually really like. The idea that if you're on your iPhone, because this happens when I'm talking to my mom all the time, that I'm on my iPhone and I answered on my iPhone because I was outside or something, and I want to actually do that FaceTime call on my iPad. You'll be able to do handoff and say, let's move this FaceTime call to my iPad or my Mac or wherever I want, instead of having to hang up and call back, which is kind of nice. That's everywhere. There are a few features that are more hardware specific. The iPhone is getting a customizable lock screen. Already you could change the pictures, right? But this is a little bit more than that. You can choose pictures. They've got a bunch of different kind of like live background kind of things where they're generating images for your background. There's one that's like, you pick emoji and it makes like an emoji pattern. You can still pick photos. They've got some other choices there. You can choose coloring. You can do a color wash on your photos, or you can choose from sort of different colors. You can change the font, which is a big step for them because Apple's like taking tight control over like the typeface on the lock screen of your iPhone. And then they added widgets, but it's not like regular iOS widgets. They're more like complications from the Apple Watch. They're little teeny tiny bits of data, but it still means like if you want to put the weather, or pretty much any app will be able to make little widgets that will get to live on your lock screen. Everybody believes that there'll be a new iPhone this fall, probably the iPhone 15 Pro, that has an always on display, just like the Apple Watch Series 5 introduced the always on display. And that new iPhone, this feature makes a lot more sense because then your iPhone's just laying there and you can see what's on it, as opposed to now where you have to tap to see what's on it. And so I think we all see where that is going. And that'll be a fun feature for people who have the brand new iPhone. For everybody else, it'll be more like you'll lift or tap to see what's on the lock screen. But I still think, as somebody who likes to put like my home weather on my devices, like what's the temperature right now, 84, I can see it in my menu bar, I will immediately put that on my lock screen and I'll be happy about it. There's also a new thing called Live Activities View, which I think is going to be great. That's not coming in iOS 16. It's in a update later on in the fall as it goes toward winter. But Live Activities View is really exciting because it's an alternative to push notifications for an ongoing event. And the example I'll give you is if you've ever done an Uber or a Lyft and they send you like 15 different notifications about where your driver is, that all can be coalesced into a single notification thing called the Live Activities View that would say, here's your car, here's where it is, here's where it's going. It's like a little updated item instead of a bunch of text messages, essentially. The other example that Apple gave is sports scores. Major League Baseball's app will let you do things like, tell me when the Giants game starts, tell me when the Giants score, or when there's a score change, tell me when the game is over. And if you have those set, every time a run scores, you get a text message, you get a push notification. With the Live Activities View, you would just have a little thing that has the Giants game on it, and it'll have the score, and the score will update, and it'll have some data, and it just sits there. It doesn't, until the game is over, it doesn't send you a flood of messages. And I think that's good. I think it's a good decision by Apple to recognize that push notifications were being abused by these things, and that there had to be a better way. I think they're using Live Activities View for music status in iOS 16 too, like what now playing kind of stuff. Okay, big news of WWDC was probably the iPad. They announced this thing called Stage Manager. It's Windows on the iPad. It's optional. For one, you have to go to Control Center and turn it on. For two, it only works with M1 iPads. So if you have an older iPad Pro, it won't work, at least unless they change their mind. You have to have an M1 iPad Air or an M1 iPad Pro. It will let you go into a mode where you can have up to 4 windows from 4 different apps displaying. There is external display support, so you can plug in an external display in addition to the iPad display and put apps up there, which means I've tried this. You can actually sit down at a computer like this one with a big screen and a keyboard and a mouse, and it's iPad OS. It's a little weird. Good, I think, but weird, and shows how much more advanced the Mac is than the iPad when it comes to how Windows work, because the iPad hasn't really had them before. And there are a lot of things we take for granted on the Mac that once you sit down at an iPad in Stage Manager mode, you realize, like, there's no Command W. Like, how do I get rid of this window? And the answer is, well, you got to move to this thing and click on it and then click this thing. And then they're working on it. They've got all summer to get it right. But as an iPad Pro user, I'm excited about Stage Manager because it, the Magic Keyboard already allows me to use my iPad Pro as a laptop, more or less. Having windows on it, overlapping windows, makes sense, actually. And I like that it's an option. For people who are confused by it, they just don't have to turn it on. And let's see, there's a weather app on the iPad for the first time. I don't know why that's news, and yet somehow we got all this way and there's no weather app. There's still no calculator app, but there's a weather app coming this fall to the iPad. And broadly, I wanted to mention the concept of desktop class apps on the iPad, only because so many iPad apps are based on, obviously, the iPhone version. The iPhone version, for historical reasons, were simplified and stripped down because they were running on an iPhone, not on a Mac. And so you didn't need all those features that you needed on the Mac, on the iPhone. Then they went to the iPad, and maybe they got some more features, but they were really starting from this position of not having features and being the simple version for the phone. And with this thing called desktop class apps that Apple introduced, they're doing two things. One is they've introduced a bunch of new things that app developers can use to make iPad apps feel more like Mac apps. Like, you know, when Mac OS X came out for the first time, if you were a Mac user back then and you got the customizable toolbar, we still have it. You could change what goes in the toolbar and drag things around and add things and remove things. Well, iPad OS 16, the iPad gets that, and iPad apps can get that. That's like a basic Mac thing that has just not been there, that will be there. And there's some other stuff that is similar, that is just like interface tools that didn't exist on the iPad because they were a Mac thing, and Apple's saying, no, they're an iPad and Mac thing, and you should be able to do them on both. But the other thing desktop class apps means is that Apple has taken its own apps and tried to make them more, they don't have to be identical on the Mac and the iPad because the Mac and the iPad are different. But I think what they did is they went to the developers of all of Apple's apps for the iPad and said, compare this app to the Mac version. Are there things it can't do? And if so, why? Is that a good idea? And maybe the answer is yes. And you don't need to do that on the iPad. But in most cases, if you can do it on the Mac, maybe you should be able to do it on the iPad. And as somebody who has spent a lot of time in numbers, and memorably, I took a road trip without my Mac and I had to do a bunch of stuff in numbers, and I hit a brick wall at some point and had to like upload my file to a Mac and use screen sharing and do the last step on the Mac because there was one feature that just wasn't on the iPad. The iPad knew about it. It could see the document, but if I wanted to change that setting, couldn't do it. Just wasn't there. So desktop class apps is also Apple challenging its own developers to clear a bunch of that stuff out. Funny thing is that a lot of that stuff ends up being in places like printing and page setup and other stuff where the legacy of not being able to print from the iPhone. And then finally, when they added AirPrint, sort of like, you can print, but don't try too hard because just don't. And now they realize, okay, yeah, you might actually want to print your documents. So they added a bunch of print stuff in that I think they just let go by the wayside. So iPad apps that feel more like the Mac. Which brings me to the Mac. Not a lot of new stuff on the Mac side, honestly, other than all the stuff I mentioned before that goes everywhere. But two features to mention. One is Stage Manager, which is the thing on the iPad. It's also on the Mac. And when I say that the Mac benefits from its decades of window management, whereas the iPad has none, I say that because when I use Stage Manager on the Mac, it's pretty good. Stage Manager basically just collects windows in a little view, but it's like Spaces, except it's all in one place. You don't go to another space. So you have your windows that are big and visible, and then off on the left side, there are a bunch of icons that are kind of like another dock. It's too many docks. They gotta figure something out there, but it's kind of like the dock, and they're like window sets. They're window groups. They should probably call this feature window groups or window sets or window manager, but they call it Stage Manager. But I think a lot of Mac users work where they've got like 2 or 3 windows up, and then they've got another task where they have 2 or 3 different windows up. And with Stage Manager, you can have them all on the same screen, but have them sort of minimized and maximized as you're working on them. And if you click on the desktop, you get access to the desktop. You can drag a file in. I think it might be good. I think some people will really like it. I was surprised at how much I liked it. But the big reason I liked it is because I know how to move windows around on the Mac, because the Mac has, since 1984, has built up this whole system of how you manage windows. And so Stage Manager is like, it's great that the iPad has it, but the iPad has no legacy of window management. They're inventing it from scratch. Basically, in the last year, they've been inventing it from scratch. And you can feel it. Moving windows around, sending them to the desktop or the dock or the shelf or whatever on the iPad is really weird and frustrating. And on the Mac, it just works. It's easy. It's understandable because the Mac's been there all along, and Stage Manager is just a new way to kind of organize your windows. Might be worth trying. You might love it. You might hate it. It's kind of like Expose or Spaces or something like that, where like some people really get it and it works for how they work. And other people are like, no, never. I never want to see that again. And Apple keeps trying because Apple still thinks it's probably too hard to manage a lot of windows. And I think Stage Manager will help a lot of people, if not everybody. I might even use it. I'm not entirely convinced, but I might. And believe me, I was super skeptical when I started using it, but it's like, actually, this might be okay. And then the other feature, the final thing on my entire list of things, having talked for 45 minutes, is continuity camera, which has actually existed for a while on the Mac, where you can like take a picture on your iPhone and insert it in a document on your Mac. But the new feature they added, it goes way beyond that. It's continuity camera for webcams, and it basically turns your iPhone into a webcam. So Apple's working with, I think, Belkin to make little mounts that'll go on displays, and then you put your iPhone in there and you can use it as a webcam. But you can also just hold it in your hand. So you could be on Zoom and say, oh, let me show this to you, and switch to your iPhone, and then hold up your iPhone to something that you want to take a picture of, and it's on the video. It's live on the video. You can do that all wirelessly. You can, I think, connect wired, but it'll do it wirelessly. It does it automatically. There are apps that let you do this, including one called Camo that I really love, but it really needs to be wired, and you have to unlock the phone and launch the app, and then make sure you don't touch something that messes it up. And with continuity camera in macOS Ventura, it just happens. Like when it's close, it knows that it's there and it turns on the camera. And if you set it in a horizontal position where it looks like it's mounted above your display, it just automatically turns it on and uses it as your webcam, which means it'll do center stage because it's got a widescreen camera. It'll do portrait mode because it's an iPhone. It's got all of the fancy iPhone camera stuff. And it's even got this feature that will use that ultra wide camera to display what's on your desktop if you want to like show what's going on your physical desktop. And the way that works is very clever. I know we've got some good power users of Zoom here. Apple's actually built an app for that view. So what you do is you launch the app, and the app sees the continuity camera is happening, and the app has a window that shows what's on your desktop. And then you screen share it using Zoom. And so you can demonstrate what you want to show that's out on your desktop while you're in a screen share context. So your face is still there coming from the webcam part. And it's like a document share that you would do in Zoom, except it's actually a live video document sharing of whatever is sitting on top of your desk, which is pretty clever. You can also, I think, set it as a camera, but like they realized that the best use case for that was probably as a screen sharing supplement for somebody who's on a Zoom call. And so they built this app as the frame around it. So I think that's going to be a feature that a lot of people really like. And I'm looking forward to using it as somebody who uses Camo now. I think it'll be great. So I can stick this iPhone right up behind my computer screen and use my iPhone camera. That is my giant 45-minute plus summary of all the stuff that went on at WWDC and what I thought of it. I am yours to answer any questions you want about that or anything else until John kicks me off.
Do you think multi-user on iOS will ever exist, or is there a reason that's too hard to do with the lock screen and the whole ownership of the phone and stuff?
I think Apple views the iPad as a personal device and won't ever implement it because they think it's too complicated and that you should just get another iPad, which is easy for them to say. But I think that that's what they think is that iPad is a one-to-one for a person, and that's it. Honestly, if they were designing macOS today, they wouldn't have multi-users in it either.
Yeah.
But it's there, so whatever.
I could see with an iPhone that belongs to you, but an iPad people share.
Yeah, I know. I know, and a lot of people use it with kids and stuff, where you want to kind of have a kid profile.
Exactly. Again, they're messing with your stuff.
Yeah, I can see that. I guess what I would say is I think it's unlikely. I do wonder if they will do something with focus modes. That might be a similar thing where there's like a special lockdown focus mode you can set up that is for someone else, where they can only do certain things and they're limited, and kind of like combine. I have a conspiracy theory that focus modes and dark mode and light mode and a bunch of security and privacy and parental control settings are all eventually going to kind of intermingle so that you can create different modes. But it won't be a user in the Mac sense. But I do think if they get there, it's going to be that way, where they're going to say, if you want a completely different experience, you need to just buy another iPad. But if you need to, in some cases, like lock this down because a kid's using it, or you want to pass it around for people to look at it, but you want to keep your stuff private, we'll be able to let you put it in a guest mode that like turns a bunch of stuff off and locks a bunch of stuff out and filters a bunch of stuff. And then now you can hand it out. That's feels to me that's more likely than an additional user on an iPad.
On the
Janet has
subject
her
of,
hand up.
oh, me? Oh, on
Yeah.
the subject of Apple improving its applications, why doesn't it improve contacts? It just with a little bit of work, it could be so good, and it's so buggy and icky now.
Yeah, it's a great question. I hate to use it. My wife and I have ended up with our Christmas card list in an Excel file. We just gave up. It's funny too, because the contacts is also at the center of the iPhone experience, right? Like it's the phone, it's in the phone app. It's how you find people to call. Maybe they need to get their house in order. One of the things, I didn't mention it, but one of the things that the desktop class apps thing does is like the contacts app on iPad is actually way more capable than it used to be in iPad OS 16. They put in the stuff that I've wanted in there for ages, like, you know, deduplicating and merging contacts and stuff you can actually do on the iPad now, which you couldn't do before. But you're right. I don't know if you've seen Busy Contacts. It's a third-party app that's really nice by the people who make BusyCal, and then there's Card Hop from the people who make Fantastical. And I think that says something, that the calendar and contacts, there are multiple third-party apps trying to outdo Apple at it. And for the contact part, it's not hard. But I don't have why does Apple do anything? I don't know. I agree with you. I feel like it just doesn't get that much attention because the people who work at Apple don't use contacts for anything except like tapping on somebody's phone number and calling them. But I agree with you. It's not great.
Like, why hasn't there been a list view in contacts like there was in OS 9 and Outlook Express and Entourage? And like, can I click on a column and sort by the zip code? And like, I can't do that.
No, third-party opportunity, I guess. Yeah. Let's see who Kenji had his hand up.
Yeah, hi there. So great presentation, really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
So this always on display, what would that be, what would they be using for the screen display technology so it doesn't eat up a lot of battery?
Well, okay, so it's OLED, but the current iPhones are OLED too. But OLED uses a lot less battery. The way OLED works, if it's black, okay, back up a step. And apologies if you already know this, but just to give the background, the way LCD displays work is that they have a screen with the pixels, and then there's a light behind them, and the light shines out. And the light shines out no matter what's on the screen. You got a big backlight, it shines, uses a lot of energy. OLED, each dot is its own thing, and the screen itself emits light. The screen emits the light, there isn't a backlight. And what that means is if a pixel is black, it's not using any energy because it's not emitting any light. So OLED displays can be really energy efficient, especially if their primary color is black. The Apple Watch has always been an OLED display, and that's why the primary everything on the Apple Watch is black with a little bit of lightness on it. So when in Apple Watch Series 5, when they went to the always on display, Apple already had OLED, and they said they did a new display controller and a new kind of display. If you think about, they've recently done a bunch of ProMotion displays on the iPhone and the iPad, where they can vary the frame rate. So it can go like up to 120 frames per second. It's super smooth. But if you're watching a movie, it'll crank it all the way back to 24. My understanding is the current iPhones, when you're not doing anything and they're just sitting there, they're actually only running at 10 frames a second. So it's actually a lot more power efficient in that way, because the graphics don't get updated every 240 times a second. It's only 10. When they went to the Apple Watch and did always on display, they took it to 1 frame per second. So my guess is those iPhone Pros in the fall that have an always on display they'll say it's a new display, OLED display, that we can take all the way down to 1 frame per second. So it's a really energy efficient. And then also the way it'll look, if you've looked at an Apple Watch, I mean, I have one here that's an always on display. It dims. Like when I'm looking at it and it's active, it's bright and the second hand is going around. But when I leave it for a couple of seconds, everything gets dimmer and the second hand disappears, because the second hand has to be smoothly animated. And at 1 frame per second, it would be like, but right. And so they're saving energy doing that. I imagine that the lock screen on that iPhone Pro will be like that. Everything will be dim. The background may even drop away entirely. If you look at the little widgets that they announced that look like Apple Watch complications, I think there's a reason for that. The Apple Watch complications and these widgets are very simple, and they're sort of just like light, circles and little bits of text. Again, a big rich iOS widget with like a weather widget with a blue sky background and clouds and all sorts of stuff. If you're in a low power, dim, but you want it to be readable kind of mode, it doesn't work. So it looks like this whole thing has been kind of designed to go into a low power mode where everything gets dim and it's mostly just the little simple shapes and simple text on the screen. And that's how they eke out the power to say it's always on. My guess is also like when you're in sleep mode and it's, at night where, it knows that you're not using it anymore, it probably just goes off until you wake up in the morning in order to save more power that way. But that's my guess. That's my best guess, is that it'll be a very similar story to the Apple Watch Series 5 when they went to the always on display with the watch.
Let's give David a chance. Got his hand up. Unmute yourself, Dave.
Got it. Getting back to the context or contact app for a second, a lot of other applications and such ask you to share contacts with them so that they've got your phone numbers and stuff like that. Do they get to see your entire contact list? And if you're using that to keep personal information, people tell you don't do that.
Right.
If you are doing that, they can see that, right?
Well, okay, so yeah, they have to ask, and it's now an entitlement. So they actually, the system has to put up a thing that says, do you want to share? And I think Apple maybe even is making that more restricted because it is a problem where it's sucking in your entire address book. So
so
don't do that. And in fact, you can go to security and privacy to contact settings and actually like turn off authorizing apps. Although once it's gone, it's gone.
right.
And so I would, if any app asks to share your contacts list, I would probably say no. That's different than in iMessage, where it asks you if you want to share your name and your photo with a person you're talking to in iMessage, because that's via Apple and it's only like your name and your image that go to the other person.
Yeah,
And I believe
getting just one more thing in. So getting back to that, if you ever have a chance to give them some input, as it's already been suggested by Janet, I think improving the contacts app, be able to separate and put a little information in there that doesn't automatically get shared with the whole.
Yeah, like I said,
probably won't want to do that.
I think Apple has changed the rules about contact sharing, and I think they've made some different APIs. So like, I think now, I'm not 100% on this, but I believe I remember that they changed it so you can't share your entire contacts list with an app anymore, that the app will ask you, and I think you have to choose what information to share. Or maybe they turned it off. It's a thing that is not an issue, as I recall, anymore, because it was so abused that Apple basically turned it off and replaced it with something else. Similar to how with photos, they used to be able to say, share, can I look at all your photos? And now you can actually choose, no, I will only share this photo with you. And then the app doesn't see your whole photo library. So I would have to follow up, but my recollection is that Apple actually changed contact sharing for that reason. Unfortunately, a lot of people share their contacts. Like Facebook always wanted to suck in all of your contacts immediately and use that information to match you with other people on Facebook and stuff like that.
Oh,
I
thanks for that.
believe though that the notes field is excluded from that sharing.
That's
So
good.
that if your sensitive information is in the notes field in context, that is not shared. I'd have to verify that.
I've seen a lot of people share, they keep their passwords in the notes field and all kinds of stuff. in there.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's not, I mean, first off, I wouldn't do that, but just
No, I
don't.
tell them now, don't do, that's not a great place to put that kind of stuff.
But it still happens. I got to look it up. My recollection is that Apple actually changed the rules about this for this very reason, but I didn't know. Anne, did you have something else?
Yes, I have two questions. You said in messages, there's a 15-minute window to edit. Does that in any way delay sending the message like it does in mail?
No, because Apple, the email is like a thing that was invented in the 60s. So it just, once you send it, it's gone and you can't get it back. It's not like even like corporate email. Once it's sent, it's gone.
Mhm.
iMessage is run by Apple. So what Apple is doing is updating iMessage itself to support these features. And I think the open question is, will they do something for older OSs so that, because right now in the beta, if you try to delete a message, it just doesn't delete on devices that are running the older system. But it might be that they're waiting for the new system to ship, and then they'll have an update for the old system that will, and they'll update the actual cloud part. So they may get there, but the way it works is it gets sent. And for 15 minutes, the timer is going, you can say, delete that. And what will happen is it'll disappear and it'll say, Jason deleted a message. So it'll tell you, you weren't imagining it. He did send you a message, but then he deleted it. And if you edit it, it'll say, Jason edited this message, I think with a timestamp. So, so you get that window to like fix a typo or delete that thing that you said that you regret saying or whatever. And it all happens because it's your phone is going to the iMessage server, and the iMessage server it's saying delete that message, and then the iMessage server is going to everybody who was on that message and saying delete that please. And they all kind of work together. But email is decentralized, so they don't have that power.
Okay, and the
And
second-
obviously, it won't work on SMS because they're not in control of that.
Right, it's only iMessage.
Right. My second question, could you elaborate on what's improved in the Home app?
They reorganized it, so it's primarily out of the original pane. You can scroll down and you can go to rooms, but they really wanted to make it sort of like a summary view. Remains to be seen how much of an improvement it is, but I just like the existing Home app so much that I have a hard time imagining that it's going to be worse. So they took another crack at the interface, and to get quick access to your stuff, they're trying to group like objects together. You can still mark things as favorites. And they're going to support the new Matter specification, which is like talking about the passkey thing. I said the Microsoft and Google and Apple were all working together. Matter is basically Google and Apple and Amazon putting down their weapons and saying, we're not going to have Alexa over here and HomeKit over there and Google Home over here. We're all going to use the same standard for smart home devices, and it's called Matter. And so it'll support that too. But they're trying to get away from the to control a different room, you have to go to a new tab and swipe to a different room and all of that. They're trying to kind of put it more right up in your face. And I think honestly, the old Home app, everything is like a little rectangle. And I think they realize that as time has gone on, there are more smart home things that are not everything fits in a rectangle, and some stuff is status, and they weren't doing a really good job of that. Like, what's the current temperature? And so they've had a rethink about it too. So it's still beta 2. So we'll see how that Home app progresses this summer too, but I'm hopeful.
Okay, we have Kenji was next, and then Scott, and then Rick.
I was going to ask about Home, but we'll wait.
Well,
Okay.
no, Rick, while we're on home, why don't you go?
All right.
ahead?
Yeah. Home follow-up, Rick. Go ahead.
My understanding is that Home is now going to abandon the iPad as a hub, requiring you to buy an Apple TV or an Apple,
HomePod.
HomePod, which is disappointing.
HomePod
And
Mini.
Home disabled all my Alexa stuff when I moved into Home. Now my Alexa doesn't work on any of my smart devices except my dining room light.
So it's not entirely accurate. So although in the betas, things are weird. So betas, my understanding, and there's actually a story that just came out today, I think 9 to 5 Mac wrote about it, that what's happening is there's a new home version, basically, a new home protocol. And that's the one that's going to also include Matter. And the iPad is not supported for the new home protocol. But Apple says, if you don't have a HomePod or an Apple TV and you want a home hub on your iPad, you can do it with the old protocol. So what they are going to make it is you're going to be able to say, no, I want to be on this, and the iPad is my home hub, and it'll work with all your existing stuff. But what it's not going to do is get any of the new features or compatibility with the new stuff. For that, you're going to need another device that's capable of being a home hub, which right now is Apple TV or a HomePod Mini. So HomePod Mini is $99. If home stuff really matters to you, it's not a particularly expensive way to get a permanently on home hub. But that's what Apple clarified today, I think, that you will be able, if all you want to do is keep your existing stuff working, you will be able to say to the iPad, basically, you are an old style home hub, keep my home on the old style. And you can do that for at least, I mean, you may be able to do it indefinitely, but after a while, you're probably going to not want to, because there'll be new stuff that you want to add. But they are adding a compatibility layer for people who are on the old, the current, but soon to be old approach.
Thanks.
Sure.
So I guess that's me then. So when we were talking about contacts and calendar, and you mentioned third-party apps like BusyCal or
CardHop
or others. So I find on a regular basis, I lose calendar events that don't sync properly. Like I'll enter them on my Mac or on my phone, and they won't go to the other device, and then they'll disappear altogether. If I were to use a third-party app, is it still using the same syncing technique on the back end, or is there a way to totally get away from that for better reliability?
That is a great question. There's two things going on. There's the app you're using and the service you're using for the calendar, and you can vary either of them. The way most Mac calendars work, especially just talking about the Mac, but most calendars in general work, is there's a calendar API that is run by the system. So the system says, and this is what the calendar app uses natively. And it's like, this is where we're talking to iCloud, or you've got your local calendars that aren't even on the cloud, and other apps can also look at that same thing. But when you're making changes, you're still going through iCloud if you're using iCloud for your calendar provider. You could also use a different calendar provider, like Google Calendar, and that's going to change things. And you can use Google Calendar inside the calendar app, or you can use it using BusyCal or Fantastical. So there's a lot of options there, I guess, is what I will say. I don't know if, I'm not using my local Apple calendars at all. I'm just using Google Calendar with Fantastical. I don't know whether your problem is iCal or it's your apps or what, but I can tell you that I'm using Google Calendar and Fantastical, and I don't have those problems most of the time. And when I do see issues, it's because I've been logged out and I just need to log back in, and then they all sync back up again. So it might be an iCloud issue or an app issue. I don't know, but you can vary either. you could try a Google Calendar account and see it with whatever app you're using, and you could see if it was a better approach. And one of the things I like about the third-party apps like Fantastical lets you just turn off the local calendars, the Mac calendars that are kind of coming from iCloud, and the calendar app, and you just turn it off and say, I don't even want to see those. So you can either use them, and the system is, and essentially the calendar app is going to control your calendars, even if you're using a different app, or you can suppress them and say, I don't even want to see them. I'm going to use my own calendar somewhere else. And that's up to you. But I can endorse, for what it's worth, I can endorse Fantastical and Google Calendar because it's worked really well for me.
Okay, that sounds really good. Is it possible to export my iCloud calendars to Google Calendar?
I think so, but I don't know. I haven't done exporting in a long time. I have to think it is, but I don't know.
And one other quick question, which is when you mentioned before that you were on a trip and you were using numbers heavily on your iPad, I was just curious what you were using numbers for on that trip.
I do charts in numbers for sixcolors.com about Apple's quarterly product or quarterly financial disclosures. I do a whole bunch of charts, and I have automation set up to generate those charts out of numbers and upload them to the internet and post them on my site. And I found that there were particular chart features in terms of like setting what the axes were and some other things that are like very much in this like chart formatting, like many layers down. And on the Mac, you could go all the layers down. And on the iPad, you went a few layers down and then brick wall. And that was just how it is. So yeah, it was all, I use numbers mostly for charts. I literally use Google Docs, Excel, or Google Sheets, Excel, and numbers for completely different things. So I am a person who uses 3 different spreadsheet apps for different tasks. I don't know why. It's just how it is. But I like numbers charting. It's beautiful. I think the numbers charts are so much better than the Excel charts. Microsoft keeps trying to make charts in Excel better. The first freelance story I ever wrote for Mac User Magazine was about making charts in Excel. And they're better than they were in 1992 or 1994. Yeah, 1994, but not much better. And numbers charts are beautiful. So I think numbers is a very weird spreadsheet, but I think it makes beautiful charts.
Nice, thanks.
Could I ask, if you use a third-party app for, say, contacts and calendars, things like that, and you want to switch back to the Apple system, do you lose anything, mess anything up?
I just check my calendar, and it has an export feature. So you should be able to export anything from anywhere and take it anywhere. And the calendar formats are all like 20 years more old. So like everybody supports them and everybody imports from them. And also, again, a lot of these third-party contacts apps actually use your contacts database on your Mac. And so
even the notes field.
Yeah, if you're on the Mac, yeah, it has access to the whole thing, I believe, on the Mac. And if not, you could export it. But yeah, you should be able to import or export or even edit it directly in place, depending on the app. I haven't used a third-party contacts app in a while. I've tried both Busy Contacts and CardHop, but I haven't stuck with either of them because honestly, as my answer to that question about the contacts app revealed, contacts aren't a high priority for me. But I cannot envision that you don't have complete portability of all of that data. And I think the calendars too. Like I said, I just looked in Fantastical, and you can literally just take a calendar and say, export this, and it exports out a giant calendar file.
Scott was next.
Yeah, my question is about password managers. Are they being rendered obsolete, replaced by things like passkey?
Eventually, probably,
Okay.
but it'll be a while. And I think that the makers of password managers like 1Password and LastPass, they see the writing on the wall, and they're already moving to kind of like corporate security stuff or secure notes or shared logins between people, although you can actually share passkeys with people. So like if you've got a business partner and you want to share the login to your bank, login, you can share a passkey just as easily as you can share a password. So I think they see the writing on the wall. I think that is the goal, is that the goal is that most of that stuff that a password manager does won't be necessary anymore. Not that there won't be a password manager, it's just that it will be managing your passkey, private keys and stuff, public keys and private keys. So it's also possible that there'll be a niche for the 1Passwords of the world to do, it's like anything that Apple implements. Apple implements the thing that they think is going to fulfill the average user, and it's going to satisfy 75% of their user base. There's always room for the third-party apps for the 25% who are dissatisfied by it and want it to be just a little bit different, right? And that's a lot of us are those people. And so I think that there's probably an opportunity for the 1Passwords of the world to find different niches in there. Like I could use Apple's password manager today. It's great. They've really, in the last year, they updated it and it's fantastic. But I don't, because my wife and I have a large selection of shared passwords between us for our home stuff and our business stuff. And I don't want to go back to the days where we were texting each other our passwords. So I think they'll find a niche, but it's going to be more of a niche than it is currently. And it's going to be less important to everybody as passwords become less important. But, also, I don't believe we're really going to kill passwords right away. Like, I think it's going to be that, is it the 80-20 rule? I think that, in 5 years, you'll discover that, yay, 90% of the passwords are gone. But there's still the other 10%, right? Somebody who hasn't implemented this and it's still sitting there and you still have to have it around. So I think it's going to be a long process before they're completely eradicated.
Thank you.
By the way, I'll put in a word for 1Password. The new version of 1Password has this autofill feature that uses the accessibility settings on the Mac to autofill, like you're logging in apps and stuff. And I love it. It's a really great addition where I launch an app and it says you need to log in, like Microsoft Office. It's like you need to log into Office 365, and I can do a keyboard shortcut and it auto logs me in just like it was in a web browser, but it's in there in Microsoft Word or something. It's pretty great. Just an uncompensated plug for 1Password 8. Any other questions? There, I see no hands. Lee
Wagner.
You said you do a lot with the charts and numbers. Is it still the case that you can't have dual y-axes on a?
I can't answer that question because I don't think I've tried, and if I have tried, I have forgotten the answer to that. That may be above my pay grade. I use numbers to get exactly what I want out of it, and then I often do that in really weird ways. I wrote a thing about how I used to print out, I still do this sometimes, print out a chart and then as a PDF and then open it in Affinity Designer and change some of the colors and the fonts. And I changed the colors because numbers wants to either have them all be the same or all be different. And somebody wrote in and said, well, you can fake it. You can make them all different and then make them all the same. And you can do all this stuff. And I said, I can, but I don't want to. I just could go over there and make it a different color. So my numbers charting knowledge is very deep in where I need it to be and completely non-existent in other places. So I don't know about that. I hope so, but I don't know.
You should know there are 38 of us enjoying this presentation.
That's great. Thank you. And I think I exhausted the questions, and it's been an hour and 20, so you've got the rest of your meeting to go. But I always like talking to you all. I'm sorry we don't do this in person anymore, but Zoom is very convenient, and I didn't have to drive to Walnut Creek or Concord or Pleasant Hill. So
Zoom has changed the world.
it's okay. It's okay.
It's actually
see your
benefited
faces.
us. We gained 20%. We gained 10% of our membership back because everybody who moved out of state can now come. So
Can now come to the meetings. No, it's great. I think for user groups, it's really a new lease on life. And I saw many of your faces in person, and now I still see them, and that's really great. And I get to do it from my garage with all these old Macs. So thank you all.
okay, Jason, thank you for coming. It was great. We'll see you next year.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
And we'll still recording, and we can take general questions or whatever you want for however long you want or not.
That was really fantastic.
He's very
Well,
good.
Jason's great. Jason, he's not doing these presentations for the other user groups, I'm telling you. I don't see him doing them. I don't know
Thought
if
it
they
was
don't ask
awesome
them or.
and very helpful. I'll see y'all next time.
Bye,
You don't
Janet.
have any questions, Janet? I'm shocked.
Another Janet has a question.
Yeah, the other Janet here.
Go ahead,
Does
Janet.
anybody make, does anybody make labels with the Pages app? I think you, I think you can do it using the Avery website, but
No, I think there's a new feature that's coming that will reintroduce mail merge into Pages directly.
Oh, it's here.
That's correct.
It's here. It's here now.
It just happened.
but I don't think it uses, well, I have to get a database that's not my contacts, but it's in a spreadsheet.
Yes, no,
Bunch of people.
I know it can do it from Pages
Huh.
and mail merge from your contacts.
Oh, I don't want to use contacts, no.
You want to mail,
Oh,
mail
I
merge from.
think that's how it would get, if you
And-
wanted to do any labels, I think that's how it would get it.
Yeah, I saw where it could do mail merge, but I didn't see labels.
Gary did
I
a,
It's
assume-
brand new.
Gary did a video, I think last week, about the new mail merge in Pages. You might want to take a look at it.
Well,
I
we
think-
will next
But
week.
if they reintroduce mail merge, they would also have to do labels. Because what would be the point? I mean, you
No,
could
no,
get
absolutely.
you could write a letter and say, okay, send this letter to blank on to 100 different people, but then how would you get the label to slap on the envelope? I think it would have to be part of the mail merge function.
Yeah.
All they need is the labels template.
Probably,
Well,
but you can also do envelope printing, no?
Well, use
I
the
think-
envelope feature instead of labels, that's all.
I think
can
Gary
order-
did a video just a couple of days ago explaining you can't do label merge, but he had a workaround on how to create labels in Pages from your contacts or a spreadsheet.
Well, you could always do labels from your contacts. That's all, that's always been there.
I've
I think you can use the Avery website has some feature like that, but I wondered if you could do it.
We do it
without.
every year for the holidays, just use the Avery system.
Yeah, the Avery system does have because I downloaded it, how to do labels with the Avery system.
Yeah, that's always been there, yeah.
Yeah,
I use
So-
labels, contact to do my labels and no problem. I use different groups.
wow.
So Bruce has a question.
Go, Bruce. Go ahead, Bruce.
You're muted, Bruce.
Sorry about that. The concern about the flaw found in M1. Regarding running two applications that could be sharing data or something like that.
Oh, that's that new thing that's, I read an article the other day that the chances of any kind of intrusion is very, very small. But I
Okay.
don't know a whole bunch about it.
But
I'll
not
bet I know
zero.
Ken Marks probably does. If he's awake. Wake
I
up,
was just
Ken.
wondering if it migrated over to the M2 or something. The same thing.
Are you
And
awake, Ken? Can you speak to that?
we hit somebody by the name of Zoom user.
Right, who is that?
Do we know who that was?
Should change their name. Who is Zoom user?
I don't see it.
Still there.
Zoom user.
Some people won't let them be on a meeting.
It's me.
like
I've
Zoom
changed
meeting.
it once.
Ah,
Oh,
Oh, it's Bill Goldberg.
Yep.
You're-
I changed
I
it
thought
once.
I
It
just
changed
saw
it
you.
back.
I think you may have left the meeting and come back, no?
Yeah. It hung.
So
Now I'm back.
So in your Zoom settings, under profile, you can set a name there for a default name instead of Zoom user.
In the phone app? I'm using the
Zoom
phone.
app.
I don't know.
If I'm not using my iPhone, then I'm using my Linux box, and those are completely different, and I'm not going to waste your time trying to help me troubleshoot over there.
So if you log into, are you logged into your Zoom account? Do you have a Zoom account?
I
Free
do,
or
but I
otherwise?
don't have it logged in on the phone, no.
Okay. Well, if you log in on the phone, then it'll use your whatever your profile is in the account.
You know, once you get it straightened out in there, then it'll use it everywhere, right?
Normally, yeah.
If
So-
you log in everywhere.
So am I the only?
logged in?
So am I the only person who has issues with some calendar events not populating always to my other through iCloud? And
Your other what?
well, I have an iPhone, I have an iPad, and I have a Mac.
Okay, are you using just the calendar or
One foot at a time.
some third-party thing?
No, I'm just using calendar.
Are you all signed in? Is it all signed in on the same account?
Definitely.
Sometimes
I
signing
had
out,
that
signing
problem.
back in, they'll do it.
I had that problem, and it seemed that I wasn't using, I was using some other, it was the calendar. I had to say, I had to change it to business calendar where it came up red, and I didn't have that synced. So when it came up brown, which was the other thing, it was not syncing. But if I have it in red, if I make it business calendar, if I give it a name, it shows up in all my things. Am I making sense?
Yeah.
You are, but I don't think that's what my problem is, because on my Mac, I'll set a calendar event and it won't populate. But if I open that calendar event again on the Mac and close it, then it'll populate.
Is this
So-
random or all the time?
What's that? Intermittent?
Random or all the time?
No, random.
Oh,
And from going, and what's worse than that is sometimes I'll set a calendar event and it won't populate and it'll disappear. It won't. And that's bad. I'll frequently have to find myself double checking all my medical appointments because not infrequently one will disappear somehow.
blame your secretary.
Yeah.
I have a hunch on that question.
As a former secretary, I take umbrage with that.
That's right. You tell them off.
Umbrage number.
I have a hunch on your question, Kenji, that you may be doing something incompletely. Since it's intermittent, it doesn't follow that it would be the software at fault. It may be operator error.
Kenji,
Which is
Kenji, do you have multiple calendars?
which is entirely possible. And I've wondered about that. Like there's a step I'm not doing when I make a
That's what
calendar
I'm
event.
thinking. That's what I'm thinking.
And it's not obvious what that would be, like maybe creating it and then closing it.
That's
Right.
quite possible.
Kenji,
What
you're-
could
Want
you
to get
do?
into the extra habit of when you create something, then go to your phone and see if it populated there.
Kenji, do you have multiple calendars?
I do.
You have to make sure that what you're posting is to the same calendar that you're reading on the other device.
Yeah, and that's another thing. I abandoned multiple calendars. I
So
use
did I.
one calendar for everything now.
Right.
Years ago, I had a similar problem. It wasn't so random, but Apple had me log out of iCloud and log back in, and it helped.
That works sometimes.
Yeah, that's like restarting your computer.
No, I think it's
Jane's
got a
been
new
trying
one.
to get a word in.
I was gonna say, sometimes I accidentally put AM instead of PM and then I can't find the darn thing.
Yeah. Fortunately, there's a little magnifying glass in the upper right corner. You can search. And it'll help you find,
What I
as
just
you
entered.
remember the title or something contained in it.
Right, I would say when Kenzie, when something disappears, go up and search for it and see if it
Really
is in another calendar or on another date or if it exists.
Yeah.
It just sounds to me like he's working on two or more separate calendars.
Yeah. Sometimes when I make an event, if I don't pay attention, it puts it in the wrong calendar.
Yep.
And I don't have all my calendars turned on. I only have my main one turned on at any given time.
Well, like I said,
Well, I have 3 calendars and I do have them all turned on all devices, except in rare condition where I want to turn one off in order to, like, for instance, I have a meetings calendar that's very busy. So I want to be able to turn that off at times so I can see the other things, so they don't get lost amongst all the meetings.
Okay. Anybody else got any issues or questions?
For consistency, I use the web interface, and then there's no problem between it and my phone.
Well, the web is in
And that would
charge.
suit you because you also run a Linux box.
Yes, but
So you couldn't synchronize between Mac
actually,
and Linux.
when I was using the calendar function on the Mac in Mac OS, it was not properly populating to my phone.
Mm-hmm.
But on the Mac or my Linux box or anything else with a browser, the web interface is consistent. The interface is not pretty, but I get consistent calendar events populated everywhere.
So you're talking about, when you say
iCloud.com.
you mean iCloud, okay.
Yeah.
Yes,
'Cause
it's not pretty,
is-
but it's consistent.
That is the master. That's what's in charge. So if something
Yes.
isn't right, go and look on iCloud.com and see if it's there.
Exactly.
If it's not there, it can't go the other places.
Oh, and maybe I said something wrong when I said Apple had me log out. It was out of my Apple ID and back in, I think.
Well, like I said, that's almost the equivalent of restarting the computer, except that this is restarting your ID on the cloud.
Right. And that's worth doing. So thank you, Janet.
Luck.
Well, are we out of technical questions? Should we stop the recording?
So many people are thinking about buying that new MacBook Air when it comes out.
Yeah.
It's going to be a nice machine. And
Any idea on the release date?
I think it's 3 months, I think. Oh, no, I looked
They
it up.
just said, they just vaguely say July, and I don't know if June
When is
30th
the
at,
new MacBook Air M2 coming out?
It just says available in July.
So it's almost July.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're not being any more forthcoming than that I can find out.
And the education price will start at $10.99.
I think Jane Powell had another question. Oh, no, she's saying goodbye.
Bye, Jane.
She's on the phone. Actually, you don't have to offer any proof of being an education customer anymore. If you want to buy something, if you go to the education store, you can just buy it. You don't need a .edu email, or used to, but not anymore.
The government store is no good at all anymore.
Like for me.
Wait a minute, 2 people are talking at once. What were you saying, Ken?
The government store is not very good for current equipment anymore.
What do you mean?
The government store had some pretty good prices before, but now on the current equipment, the prices aren't very good. In fact, there's no discount on a lot of them.
Well, on things like computers, the education store seems to be about $100 cheaper. So basically, you save the tax. It's a
If you
different.
have a military background, you get a straight 10%.
I tried to enroll my husband in the military thing because he's a military man. They asked so many questions. We just said it wasn't worth 10%. I mean, we couldn't even answer all of it.
Yeah, that
Go through
ID.
ID.me and they verify you, and then it's good on Verizon, it's good on Apple, and various other places.
Took me less than 10 seconds. I mean, I think they asked me 2 questions. I think they asked my name and maybe my social security number, and that was it.
Or
They asked for my Army ID number, I gave them that, I was through.
My husband's an accountant, so he keeps all this information, and finally we just said, forget it.
Well, the education store, they don't ask you any questions. It's just exactly the same as buying in the main store, and except it's 10% cheaper.
Kenji, I don't know. That's
doing that without
my experience. I've bought through the education store in the past, but it's been a long, long time. And I tried going in again, and they stopped me. They wanted me to go through some verification. And Ken, how do you use that ID.me in this context? Is there an obvious way to do that?
I don't know, just go to their website and sign up for it. They asked me for my Army, my Army ID number and a couple things. I may have sent them a document. I don't remember. I may have uploaded something.
Yeah,
but, it was almost painless. And
I tried it, and before when I was in the Navy, we didn't use social security numbers. We used other numbers.
Yeah.
And they couldn't find my record, so I gave up on it.
Well, I had to get my records from St. Louis, and they had to recreate them because mine got destroyed in a fire.
Well, I have my DD-214 still. But
well, that should do it, Rick.
Didn't work for me.
Really?
I gave them everything on it, but didn't work.
Huh.
Let's go ahead and stop.
I gave up
recording.
too.
Okay. Stand by.
I wonder if we're gonna have a picnic this year.
I don't think so. We haven't talked about it.
We're still
Okay,
recording.
we're still recording until now. Say goodbye.